So, first question to you: 25 years of experience in the health system. And what do you think? Did the economy you help your clients? Did they imagine what happens in the digital space of healthcare? Or do they think that the mainframe computers, all the things you have to use to help the patient in the hospitals or the pharmaceutical industry? Do they realize what happens with Google and with other things Vishal told us?
Well, based on my experience, I think that patients at this moment in time really do not realize this physically. I think there was a good slide before we were saying about these Fitbits, that everyone is seeing digital health through the Fitbit, yeah? But actually fundamental changes around genome sequencing. I was working for PerkinElmer and we started with genome sequencing. And this is really fundamental change, but no one is talking about this, you know. And if you see that the price is going down, and they say next 5 years it will go down below $1, yeah. So it means it will be so cheap that once when you know my construction, you can do so many things about this, yeah. And I think at this moment in time there is a lot of great initiatives. Yeah, and it will take some time until we get a traction. I mean, the same thing is with the internet. You know, internet started whatever 40 years, 50 years ago, but I mean, we are getting the benefit out of this last 15 years. You know, so there is some I should say, acceptance rates needed to make this structural change. So, from my perspective, I think many things are changing fundamentally, but I think patients are not feeling this at this moment in time. Yeah. So, because there are many of the stuff that you mentioned in your presentation on this cultural change, social change, and so on, like these patches that are now visible. Everyone was ashamed before. Now it's becoming also almost a cultural change, which is really important to make this happen.
Stefan, please tell us a bit about Newsenselab and Ernst. What I know, because you are in our incubator, so I know your product. And afterwards, I would like to ask you, Vishal, would you give him the money to produce this product or to scale this product over the world? But first we have to know what Ernst, and then we see if the entrepreneur who leads the VC will have the luck.
So basically our goal in the long term is to build up a platform for early predictions of chronic diseases. So we want to detect attacks, for example, of migraines, for epilepsy, and so on, for chronic diseases before they happen, right? So this is what we call predictive healthcare. That's what we want to achieve in the long term. And our first product focuses on migraines. So basically, it's a private story of mine. So my flatmate, she has migraines for, I think now for 13 years now. And I just saw her lying in bed for almost sometimes 2 or 3 days without doing nothing. And we thought, okay, what can we do to prevent these attacks? And she told me sometimes she has the feelings that the attacks come similarly with the attacks from her colleagues. She's a teacher at school. And so the idea came up to build a software basically that correlates the weather influences basically in the environment, but also important lifestyle factors, for example, that influence the migraine attacks. And by doing this, we correlate the different the certain attacks from the migraines with all these migraine relevant factors, and make a prediction in future to make actually also the daily life of the migraine sufferers more controllable. They can plan their daily lives, and also on the second side to offer therapy methods against migraine attacks. That's what we basically do.
So that means in the morning you wake up, you take your smartphone, the smartphone tells you, okay, today you've got a migraine, because I saw yesterday in the evening there was a meeting, it seems to be very stressful. Then I know when you have gone to bed, and I know when you're waking up, so you didn't sleep very well or very long. And today I checked your calendar, and I see there's a flight to Moscow. That means, and I see the weather, I see the pressure of the whatever, and I see you've got I don't know, you go to Amazon and order some coffee, and always if you drink coffee you get the migraine. So you collect the data, and what do you think? You can tell the patient, hey, today you've got migraine. If you don't fly to Moscow, if you don't have the stressful meeting yesterday, so you will never have migraine? Is it like a drug against migraine?
Well, the goal on the first hand is to actually quantify migraine in the first place, right? So we want to quantify migraine in the sense of that we want to track the migraine cycle. So the attacks come episodically. Sometimes with chronic migraineurs, they almost have each week one attack, for example. But most of the times they don't know the influence factors that goes for the migraine attacks. So I think that we can do. We can filter out the individual important influence factors, the triggers of the migraine attack. But what you're saying, like with the prediction, for example, that we can say, okay, 2 days in advance, okay, do that or do that. I mean, this is a bit difficult because it could also be a stress factor itself, right? So if we say, okay, you're close to have a migraine attack, I mean, it could also be like kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that the people get more stressed and get more attacks because of that message. So our concept is more to track the migraine cycle as a whole and discover these times of high vulnerability, but then on the right time do the right measures. So we offer therapy methods to proactively go against the attacks, but not just say, hey, you're getting an attack and that's it. So the aim is really to bring people to proactively do something against their disease. So it's kind of like you just said it on your slide. What was it from? Oh, I think it was Ernst Redmer, like from coming from passive to proactive. So this is exactly what we want to do.
So we met 2012, if you remember. You were one of the first who believed in digital health, pure digital health. So nothing, no hardware with it. And you were the first one I talked to who said, okay, I believe so things could work. So years later, what do you think? Is it the new drug? What we just heard?
Yeah, thanks very much. Yes. Hello, can you hear me? I'll just have to say it right now. So, yes, I remember meeting you in 2012 when we discussed about digital and I do believe, and I believe then and I believe now that software can be as good as a drug and sometimes be even better than a drug. Gradually more people will believe that, and it probably will happen that way. So I do believe that there is potential in having dashboards which will allow you to monitor your life and modify your life. For your product, you'll have to get the predictability high enough that people will want to pay for that. I probably would see that this will be a self-paid product. This is something that people will pay as a part of their lifestyle. Like you mentioned, your colleague, your flatmate, she has migraines, and other people in the school that she has also has migraines. Has she considered moving to a different school? Sorry? Has she considered moving to a different school? Maybe it's the people around her.
Yeah, maybe it's because of that. I don't know.
So so fundamentally, to answer your question, yes, I believe software can be as good as drugs. There are many software out there which are as good as drugs or better. So good luck. You keep building that. I think that sounds like a really good idea.
So yes, that means Google is a pharmaceutical company. So you go to be the Pfizers of the world or the Sanofi of the world without producing any molecule.
I don't really think so. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, there's so many industries that we touch with some of the technologies that we're working on. We probably technically could become a utility company because we have so many operations in generating wind energy. We could become a publisher because we have entities that create content. We could create content ourselves. There's a lot of theoretical possibilities. I really don't think that we're going to become a pharmaceutical company. In fact, many of the initiatives that we have that we have started, like the diabetic contact lens prototype, we only have advanced into this prototypes stage, and then reached out to find partners that know much more about the practical implications of creating, especially in the medical field, the practical product specifications that you need to tackle, and the regulatory questions that you need to tackle in order to come from this crazy idea of measuring your blood glucose level through a new way to a real product. And this is why we have partnered with pharmaceutical companies, in this case with Novartis, to help us drive this idea. We're much more in the field of driving these ideas and then helping others to generate profit from this using our technology. So I could much rather think about creating a business. We're far from creating business models, but I could much rather think about a business model that is licensing some of the technology to those companies rather than creating all of that ourselves.
Okay. Vishal, what do you think? We were talking about what was going to transform healthcare, disrupt healthcare. It's one of the words I don't like, but what do you think? We started in healthcare with counting calories or steps, and everyone was happy because you will be healthier just 10 years later. Or even if you manage your diabetes, it's just 10 years later you're on a better health stage. But what's going on in the digital health community? What are the next steps for digital drugs or whatever?
So I think one of the things which happens in chronic conditions, which is quite interesting, and if you track that, you find that when you give patients more control of their lives, outcomes start to improve. And that's quite paradoxical. So, you have patients groups, one of, say, with hypertension, one of them sees the doctor more often, and one of them sees the doctor less often, and uses a digital technology. And you find that the group that sees the doctors less often does better than the group that sees the doctor more often. Now that fundamentally disrupts the business model of doctors. Because in large parts of the world, they get paid every time a patient comes to see them. So what you're finding is that from the point where we were in 2012 when you mentioned we met, I was struggling to tell people how digital technologies can be as good as a doctor. Now most of the technologies which actually work are a lot better than the traditional model. So now I think the challenge in a few years would be doctors trying to convince us that they're as good as digital technology. And that's a full cycle.
That's great.
So it works in diabetes, it works in, where I have actually seen it, it works where you have randomized control data, where you actually see it in diabetes, you see that in hypertension, you see that in people who are monitoring their anticoagulants, for example. So wherever we have been able to build a device that's just cheap and easy to use and given it to patients and help them monitor their own condition, at least those who stick onto that do very much better than those who are now being brought into the clinic given a higher dose or a lower dose and sent back.
Just to think about who will start from ignoring the new digital possibilities to enhance your business. We have in Germany we always say Brockhaus was killed by Google, or you have Cola killed by digital things. What are the industries or the big companies who won't live any longer because they are old-fashioned and they don't adhere to the digital?
So yeah, if we were sitting on this panel 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and you told me that the world's biggest advertising platform would be Google, people would have laughed. If somebody said 20 years ago that the world's biggest retailer is going to be a software company called Amazon, you would have laughed. So if today we say that one of the biggest healthcare companies in 10 years from now is going to be a software company, I'm not going to laugh. I'm going to invest in the one that I think can become it. Because that's it. So the Amazon of healthcare, the Google of healthcare, the Facebook of healthcare is getting formed right now around us. And that's what my job is. My job is to not miss that one. I missed Amazon, I missed Google, I can't miss the next one.
Very sorry about that. So maybe just to clarify one thing, Brockhaus was not killed by Google, it was potentially affected by the effects of digitization, right? So we are very, yes, that sounds very PR-ish, right? No, what I mean by that is it's so easily to mistake the internet and digitization for some of the big players, right? So Amazon didn't kill the traditional offline commerce. It's just an effect of leveraging digitization and the opportunities. So this whole story is all about change. And Charles Darwin, a century and a half ago, was often quoted, heavily quoted, that those species, it's not the strongest and fittest species that will survive, it's the species most adaptive to change. And that's exactly true for companies. If you as a company, if you as an industry are stuck in the status quo, if you don't embrace the chances and opportunities, and yes, challenges of digitization, if you don't change and challenge that your own status quo, you're likely going to have a very hard time. And that is the case for many industries. That is the case for many individual companies. But it's not driven by individual companies like the Apples and Facebooks and Googles of this planet or Amazons. It's driven by progress. It's driven by progress in digitization and the internet. It has created a ton of jobs. It has created a ton of opportunity. It has created lots of value for many companies, not only these tech giants. And it hopefully will continue to do so. So, if you are a company in the tech space, if you are a company in the medical space, you will need to question your existing business model. If you don't do that, you probably make a mistake.
Okay, so let's say the death of Google correlates with the rise of Google, and Brockhaus was killed by the management who ignored the new digital things. So, Drazen, if you think on your clients, do they realize that they are killing their businesses or their companies sometimes, I suppose, or are they all waking up and everybody's becoming now digital in the old economy space?
Well, I think that the ultimate question for all clients today is, am I going to disrupt my own business or am I going to let someone else disrupt my business? This is the ultimate dilemma for everyone. Yeah? The disruption is coming to digitization, that's inevitable. It's only just about the question how we can harvest the current situation, yeah, and let someone else do this or you do this. I think when we talk about health, and if you talk about Germany as a region and probably some other regions, the problem is that the healthcare system is, let's say, in such a stable shape that it's very hard to get some of these new innovation things establish itself. I mean, it will probably happen something like what is happening to retail banking, to crowdfunding right now, and what is happening with insurance, some other companies that you'll get the crowd insurance. If that goes next step, that may happen here and actually drive the change also for the whole health system in Germany. If that doesn't happen, we'll see what will be the next step.
Okay. I think last year Google hired Mr. Insel, the chief of the Mental Health Institute, and it was, if you talk to the universities in Germany, they said, okay, we are afraid that Google will buy our scientists. So we here at the Charité Entrepreneurship Summit, what would you tell the Charité or the BIH how to get the best scientists and how to have them at the Charité and not getting them to Google or to Apple or to all those companies which seems to be very attractive to scientists at the moment.
I think that raises a very interesting and probably challenging question, and it's probably best answered by something that I mentioned earlier. You need to make sure that you have enough people that are as talented as the top talent that you have here at the Charité. We need many, many more of those people. And if we fail in Germany, if we fail in Europe, if we fail globally to foster an ecosystem that produces these interested, curious and great people that are very well educated, we will have an economic problem in Germany, in Europe and globally. So it's much more about helping people educate the teachers. I think that's a major challenge, and not only in Germany. It's not a German-specific challenge. Educating teachers is going to be so difficult because some of the kids that are that are taught by these teachers may be more savvy in some of the technologies that teachers are supposed to teach. So it may also need a disruptive approach to educating people, to educating students, by allowing academic experts to come into school, by allowing tech companies, not promoting their products, but to promote the technologies that are needed in the next year, to kind of stimulate interest and excitement among students and among pupils, to make sure that we actually generate this next generation of people that can work at Charité, that could work at IBM, that could work at Amazon or at Google. So it's a big, I wouldn't call it a war for talent, but it's a high competition for the best possible talent, and it's going to be a challenge if we don't have enough people.
Vishal, we talked about business models. When we went with this MSense to the German healthcare insurance companies and said, okay, no, we make pay-per-performance. They all love pay-per-performance, but nobody knows how to make pay-per-performance in Germany. We said, okay, if MSense detects a pattern which may cure or help the migraine patients, that's the first point you have to pay for this. And they get glints in their eyes and said, okay, that's perfect. If MSense has got its product finished, then we'll have MSense. But what are the new business models in digital health? For what do you pay? Google you don't have to pay for the Google search, but Google earns a lot of money. Does the digital healthcare means the same, freeing, selling the data? How do the young companies may earn money, and how do you get your money back then?
So it is a very attractive model to have separate the user and payer. So the user is the user who searches Google, and the payer is the person who pays for the AdWords. But the reason why that works really well is because you can harness the data and target the AdWords. In healthcare data, people are much more squeamish about sharing data. So that particular model is harder to implement in healthcare. So if you look at my portfolio, most of these companies are either B2B, where they are actually helping develop the next generation of cancer drugs, and they are making pharmaceutical companies more effective in doing that, or they are direct-to-consumer models where the patient pays themselves. The payer-paid digital health is still the hardest part of digital health. To convince payers to actually pay for something, and it's not because digital health does not create value, because digital health definitely creates value, otherwise why would people want to pay something from their own pocket if it didn't create value for them? But it is very hard for payers to understand how they find it quite hard to get out of their head that actually this is not a bottle that has pills in it and that has a patent life of 19 years and that is gone through a phase 3 clinical trial and is also being sold in United States. So that's the kind of things they're used to reimbursing, and they don't see that in digital technology. So there is a learning curve that we have to go through, and gradually payers are learning. I think in the NHS now there is an evolving model for paying for digital thing after years and years of lobbying for it. So it is a challenge to get payers to understand the value of it, and sometimes in the US it works a bit better sometimes because employers pay for healthcare of the people. So there's actually one person within the organization whose job it is to reduce cost of healthcare, which is not really the case in many other parts.
I would just like to add to this one. I mean, if you want to change something, there must be a pressure to change.
Yes.
So why would you change if everything is running for the payer? I mean, they get the money from the patients,
yes.
Yeah? And they're still getting money. They're managing, what they're going to pay you out for the doctors. And as long as there is not another pressure, and I hope really all companies, like let's just put them in one bucket called software companies, they're gonna initiate a push on the market, and the push will actually be coming from the patients.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then the payer will change.
I completely agree. I think the most powerful tool in the hands of digital health companies is their users. If they have users who love their product, if they have users that benefit from their product, that is the first pressure you want to create. The second pressure point that I've become more aware of recently, and I've been lobbying in London now successfully to set up an Institute of Digital Health is to get academics to start taking digital seriously. Because it never used to be, if you were a professor of medicine in a well-reputed hospital, you would see these apps as toys that some kids make, and not realizing the real power behind it. And I'm very pleased to say that's changing. So once you start getting that kind of academic push, then proper studies get done. Then you do proper trials. Then you find out what it's actually good for. So I think those two pressure points, I think we all have to work towards. One is the user, make happy users, make users happy, and make them use your product.
Perfect. I would like to open the discussion.
My name is Arthur, and we digitalize front-end processes on the patient side of the hospital. So my question is, as now doctors face smart patients, so patients come up with their apps they have seen and so on and so on. So what is actually the doctor's role, the hospital's role in a couple of years? Are they going to just be consultant and consult the patient on the app they are using? How do you see the market?
Question for me?
I think that this role of physician being this is how it was. The role of physician in several hundred years ago was someone who was a guide and advisor rather than doing stuff. Medicine didn't even start doing stuff until about 100 years ago. That's when we discovered that we can actually do something useful. So I think that role is going to be there. I think that right now, my experience is slightly dated. When I was a physician, we used to see smart patients as a liability, not an asset. We used to see them as the guy who takes more time from us, which we cannot then give to the next patient, because they had these printouts from the internet. Luckily, smartphones were not there when I was practicing. So, and I think that we have to turn that around and make it so that physicians see these people as an asset. We have to give them the tools where they say, look, you are the smart guy, you are monitoring your blood glucose really well. Why do you have to come and see me in 6 months? Why don't you come and see me in 12 months? And meanwhile, you can send me an email to tell me everything's okay. And I think that opportunity is not given to physicians in their systems, that the payers don't recognize that, the payers don't pay you to receive an email and read it, so you just get the patient in because they pay you for that. So I think we have to build the structures behind it for that to work.
I think that there is a huge change coming down the road, yeah? I mean, if you see how many applications are being implemented on smartphones, smart devices today already, I think that the first one to be disrupted is a general practitioner, because many of the things you can find actually before you go to him. There are more and more, I don't know who made this application, but actually if you have something on your skin, you can take a picture, send it, someone will send it back. There are so many things coming down the road, yeah? That as you suggested, I think that the doctor will become actually a consultant for you in the last instance. Obviously a surgery you cannot replace by app, yeah? You cannot take the phone and touch your heart. Not yet, yeah? But we'll see how this is going to go. But I think we really have to start, or let's say accept that the change is inevitable. And it is coming. No one is protected at this moment in time. So whatever you do in that space, I think is on the right path, yeah? And just follow, yeah?
So just to add to that, so if you, there is a company, I'm not going to miss an opportunity to plug one of my portfolio companies, it's called My Recovery. What it does is it allows a connection between the patient and the surgeon throughout the journey of that, so they have to see each other less frequently and have better quality of care. So I think those things we have to build.
Yeah, my name is Christian Zirona. Let me throw in a little controversy into the discussion. If you look at health data, it's probably more valuable than the data actually Google bases its model on with AdWords. It helps us find things we're looking for. In this case, health data will help us to live longer and healthier lives, which is maybe at least as important. And the value is already being shown with business models of 23andMe or patients like me, where those actually data are very valuable and being commercialized. So, who should own those data?
Is that a question? It sounds like a Google question. So we strongly believe that user data belongs to users. So it's an underlying principle. So if you take up anything from today, Google data, user data belongs to the user. Which is why for all the Google products, we make it very transparent to understand and see what Google knows about you and what Google stores about you, and then you can look up in a product called Dashboard, where you can download all your photos and take it to the next service. So you can download all your mail, or you delete and adapt your web search history, whatever Google knows about you. You can take home, you can delete it, you can distribute it, whatever you want to do it. It's your data, and that's a very, very important fundamental principle. When it comes to additional services, first of all, as I explained earlier, many of the new initiatives like Nest or some of the Calico experiments in prolonging life are complete separate entities. They're not connected to your Google account. So if you search for diabetes, no one in the Nest world, no one in the Calico world, no one in the Google Capital world will know that this is connected. And we deliberately have set up, as I explained, the structure in order to disallow any of these connections. And then in addition, most, if not all, of these new initiatives are not geared towards making your personal life longer. They're geared towards identifying patterns and mechanisms in order to create systems, in order to create technologies, in order to create opportunities for researchers and physicians and institutions in order to make life better in general. It's not about identifying that you have a specific medical condition that we'd like to treat, or you have another medical condition that we can treat differently. We don't need to know your individual profile, and that's not the goal of any of these projects. It's more a very generic, holistic approach of identifying, hopefully, through technology, through very, very large-scale data analytics, some odd pattern that we find in millions of sequenced human genome databases. If that happens, and if we can provide some triggers that will trigger additional questions that somebody hasn't thought about in some research institutions, in some academic institution, that's great, and that's exactly the goal of that. And again, we don't think about business models in the first place. If something happens, and if something is so valuable that millions of users have benefit from that, eventually we'll find a business model. This is also how Google was created. The founders didn't think of money in the first place. They had this very altruistic vision of making information more accessible. And then some adult supervision came, Eric Schmidt came and said, well, we need a business model. So you have an opportunity to create this reach that you have created with a search engine into a successful and sustainable business model.
I think that I'll take a different approach to answering Christian's question. I think sometimes when we ask the question who owns data, sometimes our expectations are rooted in the real world. And in the digital world, ownership, access, sharing have different meaning. So when you have a car in the real world, if you are driving the car, your wife can't drive the car. But if you have a data set, you can use the data set and somebody else can use the data set without destroying any value for you. So you don't get any poorer when somebody else gets richer. And that's actually quite interesting because we have grown up in a real world where we have put value into things, and those things can only work by making one person richer and another person poorer. So I think we have to start thinking about, when we say ownership, we may have to find a different word for ownership, where we say that actually our data is valuable to us, but it's actually less valuable if we hold it on a hard drive that is disconnected from the internet and sits in a drawer, which is what most people do after they sequence their genome, is they get the hard drive, they put it in a drawer somewhere, lock it, and that's what it is. That's probably the most wasteful thing in the world you could do today. And so I think that the value of your asset grows if you share it. Now what we have to find is two things. One, we have to find a secure way by which you feel comfortable sharing it. And two, is to communicate to you what is the value very clearly for sharing it. So it has to tell you that your hard drive sitting in a drawer does this for you, But if you share it in a secure way where other people could benefit and maybe one day you could benefit, it means this. And then you can make an informed decision. Is that I still want, there are some people who keep their money under their mattress. They don't put their money in a bank account, that's fine. But slowly and slowly, these people lose friends and we don't talk to them anymore. That's what happens. So this is, but they have made a valid decision based on what options are available to them. And I think that's how we have to start thinking about data in a much more sort of manner going forward.
And if I may to this one, today, if you see the data protection laws are focused on protecting a single attribute, nonsense. Yeah, absolutely nonsense. It's about a pattern. Yeah? And I think we really have a radical change about doing this and talking about the value that you're getting about sharing the data rather than protecting. The other one is what we see is there is a huge generation shift. Yeah? Youngsters are sharing absolutely everything. Yeah? Everything. Yeah? I tend to share but not share. Yeah? I mean, it really depends on the generation. But the point is, eventually everything at the end will become somehow visible. What I would like to have as a user, what the colleague from Google is saying is transparency where my data is, and if I have a control who have access on this one. The only what I don't want to be misused. If Amazon has my data about my shopping pattern, it's quite cool. You go in there and get some really nice stuff, yeah? Does it bother me? Actually not, yeah? But if they start selling this information to I don't know who else, yeah, then I will have a problem. So I think it's transparency, changing data privacy, data management legislation around this, and actually educating the people how to deal with data, and there is the value for them and for the group where they live.
Justin Roadshow from the Embassy Canada. I guess I'm glad you went before me because it was along these lines, but I wanted to come back more on the role of government because, as you mentioned, there's a big generational problems. Younger people are much prepared to share much more information. I really think that we need a disruption in the way we think in government in terms of privacy, and we really need to look at how we can shape things to avoid advertorial effect on people. What people are scared is that if they're stolen their data and they cannot get an insurance for life, or they cannot, these are the kind of stuff that we need to absolutely have no tolerance and make the protections in place. So my question is a bit of that nature. Is it in that sense, you know, when we're talking about patent, all of these things needs to be rethink, but you know, government doesn't have other government that comes to disrupt them. You know, it's not like companies disrupting companies. So how do you get governments to really come to this conversation in a way that is very constructive and more representative of the values of the new generation?
May I try to answer this? If anyone here in this room believes that if you go to insurance and don't tell that you have one of the diseases, yeah, and you close your policy and hope everything will look fine, you're on the wrong side. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, not disclosing information if someone is offering you an insurance at the time when you're closing your policy neglects your complete policy. Yeah. So, I mean, if I'm I don't know, I like doing paragliding. Yeah. So if I go to the health insurer, let's say life insurance company, and say I'll close the policy, do you do extreme sports? No. And I die by flying, yeah, they will pay me no penny. The point is that if you don't disclose information, you don't get the right service. Right now, the people still think they can hide some stuff and get a great deal. By opening up the data, I mean, you will just get the optimal deal, I think. Hiding is not the way of running the businesses of the future. I mean, things are becoming very transparent.
I completely agree with you. I think try getting car insurance, right? So if you go and buy car insurance and you say, well, I've had 3 accidents, you don't tell them. And you feel very clever. But what if your neighbor did that? So your premium will go up. So it not only applies to you, it applies to people in general. I think what we have to do is close it at the exit point. We have to legislate not against sharing. We have to legislate against abuse, yes. Against people if something was known about people. So 10 years ago, there were countries, and there are still countries, there were institutions where if somebody found out that you were homosexual, there would be consequences of that. We didn't stop that we didn't protect them by making it illegal to tell people someone's homosexual. We stopped that by making laws against against abuse against homosexual. I think that is the end at which you legislate. You don't legislate at the entry point, you legislate at the exit point.
I think it's legislation, but really education of the masses. The people still think by hiding they can somehow protect themselves. I mean, predicting fraud today in business is simple and trivial. Fraud in insurance is trivial to predict and to find out the people who want to do this. So it's only the question of education and spreading this information that if you are someone who is betraying, we'll find you easily.
Just one question from me. Just have a look in the future. You know probably about the patent from Amazon. They send you goods you don't have ordered, but you need them, and so you they have ordered the goods to you, and you pay it, then it's perfect. When are we in this stage in the healthcare system? So we have prediction to tell the diabetic person, okay, if you don't check your blood glucose every day and you don't live like a diabetes patient should live, you will die, I don't know, 5 years earlier. But the perfect thing would be you get a call from Google, or an alert from Google says, okay, you are the risk, you should go to the hospital because in 1 hour you've got a heart attack or something like this. Are we on this way in your X labs? Do you work on this?
To some degree, yes, we are on the way of experimenting with that. So I mentioned some of the devices that can, and you are actually working on exactly the same challenge, right? So you're trying to find models to predict migraine attacks. That's exactly the way that you have been describing, and you can take that model, that mechanism to many typical diseases. What if you had a Fitbit-like device on your wrist that could tell you if some vital functions are on the verge of predicting something that could be serious to you, and that could trigger a suggestion to go to the doctor and have a check done. Everybody will probably say, that's a great service, and I'm probably willing to pay for such a device, or for the service that is rendered through the device. What I find, and this is a personal opinion, what I find a little scary, and I would opt to not use these services if somebody told me, based on your gene pool, based on your individual history, we think that in 5 years you're going to develop disease XYZ. I wouldn't want to know this, but it's an individual decision. We will have challenging, and this is totally independent of Google or any other technology company, we will have challenging questions, such as the ones that you have just mentioned, the entry versus the exit point. You will have challenging questions. The more technology advances, the more questions an insurance company is able to ask, and the easier it will become to answer those questions. And today it sounds great if your insurance company for your car tells you, well, if you install a device that tracks your braking behavior in your car, we're going to give you 10% discount, because then we can track whether you are a kind of defensive driver versus offensive driver. If we track that you are defensive, then we're going to give you X% discount. That sounds fantastic to those people that are not feeling discriminated by that. But what happens if the same model discriminates those people that cannot prove that they have a defensive track record in driving? For healthcare, the same mechanisms, and we're already seeing this in many countries with insurance models, where insurance company says, we'd like to encourage our insured people at insurance company XYZ. If you are doing sports, if you can prove that you do sports every week, we're going to give you a discount. What if? And that also sounds great for those people that are willing to do exercise. But it should be the free decision of everybody to say, okay, everybody tells me that smoking is not healthy. Everybody tells me that eating fatty food is not healthy. Everybody tells me that not exercising is not healthy. But that's my decision. I don't want to do sports. I want to smoke. I want to drink alcohol, and whatever else is risky for me. It's my personal decision, and I should not be discriminated against attractive new technologies for insurance companies. So I think, and again, coming back to the regulatory question, that is when regulatory questions need to be defined in order to make sure that no one is left out, no one is discriminated, because these technologies allow new ways of business models for insurance companies.
Yeah, I think when you say you should be allowed to smoke, as long as you're paying your fair premium, I think no one should have a problem with that. I think the challenge is when you don't measure anyone's input and then you average the risk around everyone, when we could identify that there are some people who are consuming more than the other. So we don't want the freeloading problem into that. But I think that the challenge so far has been that none of the technologies that I've seen which predict things have sufficiently low false positive and false negative rates. So especially if you are predicting let's say a cardiac event, what would happen is you would end up in a hospital and someone's going to put a stent inside you, right? And putting a stent inside people is itself an inherently risky process. What if 5% of people who show up with this alert did not need the stent? Now, if you look at that 5% over the population of 60 million people, that's several thousand people arriving at hospital, and the risk of having a bleeding event, I would guess, in putting a stent is going to be like 0.1%. So you will have 0.1% of these several thousand people having an adverse event for no reason. So, which is why, when you think of these kind of interventions, you have to think of what the next stage of that intervention is and what the probability what the risk of adverse events in that is. So I think that, especially when you start applying it to a large population, the actual false negatives and false positives are in thousands per day. These are not kind of, if everyone wears that bracelet and is informed, you have to make sure that technology has very, very low false negative or false positives in that, and has to be very, very precise. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I think we will get there, but there is a journey, and that journey involves big data. That journey involves large sets of data by which we can prove that they have low false negatives and false positives.
I would also say it's also we talk a lot about data, the quantity of data, how much data we can get. But especially on this point, I also think it's about the quality as well.
Yes.
So right now, if we connect wearables like that to our applications and so on, so we have a lot of data maybe we cannot use or we don't want to use because it's just like a lot of noise there. So I think one crucial question when it comes to the time scope, when we get these kind of predictions, I think it's the quality of data, and we have to go with the data and with the technology, not just on the body, but inside the body, so we have to get the sensors inside the body, and the question is then when it comes to this point in time, it's not just a technological question, but it's more kind of a societal and human side of question of acceptance, right? So will people really accept technology inside their body, especially also what you said in your presentation, when I don't have the ownership of this technology. So in the end, I think it's not just a technological question. I think it's much more on the acceptance, it's much more a societal and a human question when we get to this point.
Yes, I agree. I think the human dimension is absolutely key in doing that. We have to build things which people are willing to use. People don't feel that there's a big brother watching them. They should willingly, they should have sufficient value. So we have in Britain, I'm sure you know that we have lots of security cameras, CCTVs everywhere, and everybody hates them until they get robbed. And then they go and say, where's the CCTV image of me getting robbed? They say, oh, sorry, we were not using that camera. Why were you not using that camera? So it's a value. Until you see the value in the actual product, you find that to be quite intrusive. But then I think we have to. That game has to be won. I don't think we have